Hello and welcome to IDC's key event, Ransomware Attack Vectors in 2022 and How to Avoid Them. My name is Michael Hainsworth, veteran BNN senior anchor and CTV News business correspondent and IDC contributing editor. I'm the creator of Where's My Jetpack, and I'll be your host for today's extensive discussion about the evolving nature of ransomware attacks, the role both government and our cloud providers play in avoiding them, and how we can close that IT security skill set gap present in most companies today. To help guide us through this critical discussion will be Yogesh Shivari, IDC's crackerjack cybersecurity researcher, and ace IT guru, Rob Stevens of Carbon 60. The majority of small to medium-sized enterprises polled by IDC experienced an average of 3 breaches per year, costing as much as $250,000 per incident in ransom payments alone. Large corporations report the cost per breach is as much as $10 million. The impact on a company's brand reputation is incalculable. The Canadian cybersecurity market will grow to more than $5 billion annually by 2025, thanks in part to ransomware. The shift to cloud-native managed data storage and management may lead companies to think security is someone else's problem. Carbon 60's Rob Stevens joins us for his insight. Rob?
Hello, I'm Rob Stevens, Chief Revenue Officer for Carbon 60. We spend our time working with companies trying to understand what the business challenges are that they're facing, the biggest objectives they've got, and also the outcomes that they're looking for. Many companies are deploying and procuring new technology solutions, but many times they don't actually get to production based on the skills gap that they may have within the organization or competing priorities, or maybe an emergency that comes up that they didn't forecast for. We try and work with organizations to understand exactly what they need in order to get these technologies deployed and how they're going to maximize the benefit from those. In many cases, we will engage the organization with our award-winning professional services team from Ops Guru, or we may offer the customer a managed service so that we operate the solution for them. They continue to get the benefits, but they can carry on running their business as normal. The cloud is a great consumption vehicle with a lot of services and a lot of great technologies that organizations are looking to consume, but it's an area they can also get into trouble with very quickly. We find ourselves getting involved in many assessments, migrations, and ongoing management of public cloud environments, whether it's AWS, whether it's Google, or whether it's Microsoft. If you're interested to understand any more of our capabilities and work with us on any of these things, please let me know.
To discuss that false sense of security and how to think proactively about it, let me introduce you to Yogesh Shivari of IDC. Yogesh?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session. I'm Yogesh Shivari, the lead cybersecurity market analyst at IDC Canada. And today, I will be taking you through insights on ransomware, a new kind of pandemic. Well, ransomware itself is not new. What is new is that how rampant it has become. Its significance can be gauged by the fact that country leaders are discussing ransomware in international summits. In October 2021, the US National Security Council hosted leaders from over 30 countries at a 2-day summit on ransomware. Today, ransomware is amongst the top business risks to digital enterprises. Canadian organizations have made significant investments into digital transformation over the last decade, which was profoundly amplified by the impact of global pandemic. Now, to engage with customers, taking a digital-first approach to new products and services is becoming an imperative for organizations in many industries. Governments and banks are rapidly rolling out contactless services for citizens and customers and integrating them into customer journeys through digital platforms. Traditional retailers are scaling up e-commerce capabilities to compete with the born digital online marketplaces. Education and healthcare, they are shifting to a blended online plus offline service delivery models. So these are only few examples, but if you see, DX is all around us. And now it is a definite imperative for all industries going forward. With years of investments, businesses have built consumer trust into digital experiences they offer, but today, these digital experiences are under attack. Now, on this slide, you would see some of the latest and biggest attacks on Canadian organizations. And you may ask, why is this important? Why should you know this? Well, we ran a survey last year amongst Canadian CEOs and found that by 2025, Canadian CEOs expect 48% of their revenue to come from digital products, services, or even experiences. So these attacks, they not only jeopardize an organization's digital investments today, but they also threaten its ability to compete in future. Let's take a moment to understand how has ransomware evolved in the last few years. And I will be cognizant of the fact that not everybody understands the technical terms on this slide, but the key takeaway is that attacks are increasingly targeted compared to the sort of carpet bombing attacks we saw a few years ago. So attackers today perform very detailed recon before launching attacks, and they even gather information about financials and insurance coverages to gauge the ability of a victim to pay a certain amount. They have definitely grown in complexity and stealth, and the ransom demands you hear now are just off the roof. So ransomware has evolved from just a malware to a thriving industry, with ransomware as a service putting vulnerability exploit kits, infrastructure for exploitation, negotiation and victim management, payment management, all these capabilities into the hands of anyone who's willing to launch a cyber attack. And on top of it, the anonymity of cryptocurrencies has only further fueled the propagation of this digital extortion. So how rampant is ransomware in Canada? Well, as per our research, 4 out of 5 Canadian organizations have detected a ransomware attack last year. Well, that's one of the biggest reasons why we chose to compare the current state of ransomware to the pandemic. That's how prevalent ransomware is today. And the pseudo protection that smaller organizations had a few years ago by virtue of their size, well, it just does not exist anymore. Organizations of all sizes and industries are a probable target now. And SMB organizations, they may not be the target of a targeted attack by, let's say, a nation state attacker, but they often get caught into elaborate phishing campaigns and supply chain attacks. And now another contrasting data point that emerged when we asked Canadian organizations if they were confident that they were aware of all data breaches that occurred in their organization in the last 12 months, and surprisingly, 2 in 5 respondents said, no, we're not very confident. Well, so I see a serious gap here. On one hand, ransomware and other cyber attacks are getting increasingly rampant. And on the other, Canadian organizations are not just prepared to match the sophistication of the adversaries, especially when ransomware is evolving at a dizzying pace. Multiple extortion ransomware is now the most prevalent form where attackers demand ransom not only to provide a decryption key, but also for exfiltrated data. They're not only going after the victim organization, but also their business partners, employees, and consumers whose data is compromised. Now, let's talk about the real cost of ransomware. So what is the real cost of ransomware? As per IDC research, 30% of Canadian organizations paid ransoms to attackers, while 35% did not. And the remaining 35% preferred not to answer. But I feel it is an answer in itself, don't you think? So those who have been impacted, well, they know what the real cost of an incident is, and that it far exceeds the ransom demands or payments that often make the headline. Average ransom payments paid by Canadian organizations, well, they range from $60,000 to $210,000 from small to large organization. And these are average numbers. So for larger organizations, they could run into millions of dollars. However, attack mitigation and recovery may involve extensive participation of external experts, overtime of internal resources, and specialized tools that add to direct cost of mitigation. Now, top it up with costs associated with unrecoverable data and downtime, which brings the average direct cost associated with a ransomware incident to somewhere between 500K to 1.6 million per incident. And apart from this, there are several soft costs associated. We're talking about loss of reputation, the lawsuits and settlements that follow, regulatory fines, loss in market capitalizations, or even valuation for startup companies. And many times the soft costs, they turn out to be more substantial and long lasting than the direct cost. And unfortunately, these are the costs that your cyber insurances won't cover. Having said that, I just want to leave this question on your screen with our audience today. How much downtime can your organization manage? Is your security posture in line with this business goal? And have you tested your incident response plan? Well, these questions, they deserve a renewed and a serious thought when you know that in future, almost half of your revenue is going to come from digital products, services, and experiences. And the example on the slide is based on several emails that I received as a parent of a child that attends school in the Peel District School Board. When they were attacked last year, it took them approximately 21 days to bring services back online. And based on our research, that is the approximate number of downtime that organizations in Canada suffer when they're hit with a cyber attack or an incident. But think of organizations with different business models, like an e-commerce site. The simple rule is that as business models evolve to rely more and more on uptime, the costs associated with downtime are surely going to go up as well. In current times, when cyber attacks are almost imminent, Canadian organizations are making investments into their security practices. As per an IDC survey last year, 41% Canadian organizations see IT security as the top area of their 2022 IT investments. And that's good to know because resource constraints, be it budgets or be it skills gap, is the biggest concern of security teams in Canada. On an average, Canadian security teams are underfunded by almost 25%. And skills gap, it's even bigger issue, compared to the budget restraints. Many Canadian organizations, despite with available budgets, find it absolutely challenging to hire and retain security experts. And there is also an urgent and dire need for security tools and process modernization. So we've covered the people angle, but there is a dire need to modernize the security tools and processes as well. And let me give you a stat for that. 41% Canadian organizations believe that their current security tools and processes may not be sufficient when it comes to dealing with an advanced attack. Now, just for an example, consider a workflow. Let's talk about the alerts investigation workflow. 48% Canadian organizations in IDC survey last year indicated that they don't have the resources to even investigate all of high priority alerts. And throwing more bodies at this problem won't solve it. And what is needed is orchestration and automation within the threat management lifecycle. Without this modernization of security tools and processes, the gap between adversaries and security teams will just continue to expand. In the digital era, businesses won't become trusted just by doing good or being good, but by pursuing strategies to build trust with employees, customers, partners, and other stakeholders through effective risk management, regulatory compliance, security management, and promotion of a cybersecurity infused company culture. Digital hygiene is a big component of a cybersecurity infused company culture. Consider tabletop exercises that are beneficial for senior leadership and security teams as it takes them through simulated security incident scenarios and provides hands-on training for incident preparedness. Attack simulation exercises and cyber ranges, for that matter, are effective ways of training security staff on how to detect and mitigate cyber attacks with technology they have on the job. And apart from these, everyone in the organization needs to understand how to approach a suspicious email, how to keep company data safe, and how to create a strong password and manage them. So security awareness trainings cover these topics and much more to ensure poor IT hygiene does not lead to a security breach. I think that's the key takeaway here. The other aspects of security infused culture are integrating security into the DevOps process. Now, DevOps has done well to improve the time to market, but the shift to DevSecOps not only embeds security testing into the continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines, but they also parallelly build knowledge and skills needed in the development team so that the results of testing and the fixing can also be done internally. And organizations, they also need to evaluate and consider incorporating principles of zero trust within their security architecture. The key principles of zero trust strategies are continuous authorization, least privileged access, and a continuous assumption of breach. Zero trust strategy has gained popularity as a scalable security architecture that is readily extendable to devices and networks. It enhances visibility and control and aids in faster threat detection and response. Identity is the common denominator for access in the zero trust model. So even though it addresses secure access needs, it further facilitates better monitoring, threat investigation, and forensics. And the assumption of breach, it changes the entire mindset of how organizations approach cybersecurity. It brings renewed focus to threat detection and response, same as how organizations focus on threat prevention. CIOs today understand that no security architecture can guarantee 100% protection from threats, and modernizing monitoring, threat detection, and response are equally important. Now, zero trust implementation, it is different for each organization, and each organization needs to take a different approach depending on its own unique IT environment. So some organizations you would see may begin with optimizing identity and access management and deploying a zero trust network access, while others, they might just begin with micro-segmentation in the data center and creating smaller DMZs. Now, this is pre-incident or pre-attack, but when an organization is facing a cyber attack, it elevates the organization to a very chaotic level of emergency management. So firefighting can get real messy. It is easy to make mistakes that will haunt an organization for a very long time as lawsuits follow, as regulatory scrutiny follows, which is why organizations must invest in incident readiness and planning and a communication plan that security teams can fall back on during the time of an attack. And incident management is only the half part done. Remediation and recovery without a comprehensive forensic investigation leaves organizations susceptible to repeat attacks, which in fact are not uncommon in Canada. So, well, these things are easier said than done, and IDC recommends to work with experienced security partners who can use their knowledge of threats, security controls, industry and regulatory standards to design, implement, and manage threat protection and incident response controls so that you always have the capabilities to deliver key security advisory, consulting, and training services that can help the organization to deliver and maintain a security posture that aligns with the business goals. Well, that's all from me. And now back to our host for the panel discussion.
Yogesh, that was fascinating. Joining Yogesh and me now is Carbon 60's Chief Revenue Officer, Rob Stevens. Rob, hello.
Hello, how are you doing, Michael?
Well, thank you. Security must always be a job zero at the end of the day, but you're seeing new attack vectors and the way hackers are trying to exploit companies. What do those new attack vectors look like?
We are seeing an increase across the security industry and across all of our customer base as well, in the way that they're telling us they're being affected. It's not just the typical scenarios of going after an open port or an open socket. They're now going after the users. They're trying to leverage the user's trust, and they're trying to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt by getting users to respond to things. So these threats are actually coming from within rather than from directly outsourced or into an IT infrastructure where they're attacking a port or some kind of critical piece of information. So we are seeing a number of different things. Our customers are telling us that they're trying to increase their protection in-depth strategies, and they're trying to surround their not only their IT infrastructure, but the education that they provide to their users as well.
It's an interesting point that at the end of the day, often the weakest link happens to be the human component to it all. Yogesh, let's expand upon your presentation. We're seeing some signs that the cost of ransomware frequently now includes an element of bait and switch. Pay us, we'll give you back your data, but pay us more and we won't make it public.
Well, that's a great question, Michael. And you know what? Increasingly, the bait and switch tactic is commonly used for pressurizing victims to cough up more cash. They start usually with a ransom demand for encryption, and once the victim starts engaging with them, and there is some demonstration of engagement, they drop the bomb, and that we have also exfiltrated these thousands or millions of records of data. So if you want us to give it back and not publish it on the dark web or even sell it to other hackers, there's a new price. And that's what multiple extortion is, and now multiple extortion is the leading form of ransomware, as opposed to locker ransomware or crypto ransomware a couple of years ago. Not just that, they even reach out to the customers and partners of the victim to put more pressure. Tell you, even if you recover your data from your backup systems, your partners are still going to know that your data was exfiltrated. Your customers will know, and so will the media. And this entire premise of public shaming is extremely daunting for many organizations, especially in the B2C space. And when you consider new regulations that are coming up, especially around data privacy in Canada, regulations like Quebec 64 and the proposed Bill C11, which is in the parliament right now. So we're expecting GDPR sort of regulations in Canada. So there's also a privacy commissioner. So that is another angle that we expect the attackers are going to exploit. You may have excellent systems, but we're gonna just communicate this to privacy commissioner, and they know, everyone knows, so it's out in the open. So that's an added amount of pressure on the victim. So bait and switch is increasingly going to be common in my opinion.
Garmin was an example of one of those companies that found themselves suffering from bait and switch.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're not the only one. There's so many. When the latest survey, the ransomware survey came back to us, I've just reviewed the results this week. So there is a whooping around 33% of the organizations which paid ransom, and they did not use the decryption from the attackers. They paid ransom only for the exfiltrated data. So it's not just one example. It's quite common in Canada.
So Yogesh, you're saying the ransom payment is just the tip of the iceberg here?
Well, absolutely. So if you look at the cost of ransomware, those who have experienced it, those who've been the victim of it, they know that ransom payments usually account only to 10 to 15% of the overall incident cost. We're talking about costs associated with downtime. We're talking about costs associated with direct mitigation and recovery. There are tons of external services required during these emergency crisis times. So all those costs add up, and I'm not even accounting for the soft costs, which could be, about the damage to your brand, the lawsuits and regulatory fines that follow these incidents. So if you recall from my presentation, the average ransom payments in Canada, they average roughly around $130K. So that puts the cost of incidents in Canada roughly around $1.5 million. Now that's huge for a lot of customers, especially in Canada, where around 98% of the businesses are SMB, and that financial cost is too much to bear for many organizations.
Rob, Yogesh was pointing out that there are laws and new regulations that are attempting to address this sort of issue. But doing the research for our conversation, I was stunned to learn that the US government actually fines companies that pay ransom.
Yeah, and that's a relatively new thing in the last couple of years, but we've seen the US government taking a very firm stance on directing it back to the organization themselves and saying, look, you need to be able to have your own technology. You need to have your own strategies to mitigate this even getting to this point, because ultimately we don't want to fund any kind of cyber terrorism, from our country. So they're really stamping their feet down, and the US government is saying, look, if you're going to pay the ransom, then we're going to charge you a penalty as well. So to avoid that, hopefully more companies are getting on the front foot, and now they're really trying to, mitigate have any mitigation strategies and having the right technologies in place, and also monitoring their own footprint. One of the things that we've actually been seeing, similar to what Yogesh was saying, we're actually seeing customers come to us and saying, how do hackers identify us? How would someone look at us as a threat? And then we can actually provide a scorecard, a report, if you will, and say, this is how the external world looks at you. And it's amazing because now from a vendor relationships perspective, you're seeing organizations say, hey, I want to know what the score is for XYZ company, because if I'm doing business with them, there could potentially be some downstream impact if they were ever to get hacked or to get breached or whatever. So, we are seeing not only from governments, and Yogesh mentioned Bill 64 kicking in Quebec, the Canadian government taking more kind of awareness and more steps to protect that. But we're also seeing other companies sort of looking at their vendors and their suppliers and also saying, hey, what are you doing? We want to make sure that we're working with trusted and verified vendors. So they're taking an external look, and that's a service actually we provide today.
I wonder, though, if the risk of not paying may be greater than the disincentive. What's the penalty for paying ransomware?
For the penalty in the US?
Yeah.
You know what? I honestly haven't looked at it in the last few months. It's significant. I think Yogesh was on the conservative side on some of the numbers that he was sharing, but they are definitely up into the millions of dollars. And we've seen some big brand names. You mentioned Garmin. There's some other very sort of tier one enterprise organizations in the US and in Canada that have been affected. But what's more worrying is the ones that we don't hear about, because how do you know about the organizations that have been affected that aren't public, right? And I'm aware of a few of those myself. Obviously, I'm not going to share the names of them, but those for me are the ones that are most concerning.
So then talk to us about the role cloud providers play in securing an organization. If most of our work is SaaS-based and in the cloud, are IT departments off the hook for breaches in the cloud?
Not at all. And if you look at all of the hyperscale cloud providers, Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, they all have what's called a dual responsibility model. And basically that means that they're responsible for the security of the cloud, but you're responsible for what's in the cloud. So for instance, lots of flexibility, lots of scale, lots of great capabilities offered by all of the cloud providers. But if you were to build an application in one of those clouds and you were to leave things in an unsecure fashion, leave ports open, leave them vulnerable, the cloud provider is not responsible for that. They're responsible for making sure that you have the capability to secure your application. But if you don't utilize all of those things in place and you don't take advantage of them, you could potentially be still creating a very big hole into your environment. So whilst the cloud is an amazing consumption vehicle for enterprises and small companies to get up to speed and deploy amazing technology, you still have to take your own accountability for when you're securing it.
So Yogesh, with that in mind, what does the gap in an organization's IT skill set look like today?
Well, absolutely. And before that, I talk about the skills gap. Let me just add a bit to your previous question. So because cloud is becoming one of the most prominent deployment models in Canada, and honestly, a lot of digital innovation today is now tied to the future of cloud. So it has become a very important component of the digital transformation initiative of Canadian organization. And that's the thing with the cloud, there is no deployment model, like Rob said, that, be it infrastructure as a service or PaaS or even SaaS, where the customer is completely off the hook. The responsibility for securing cloud assets and services are always shared. Even in SaaS, where, the provider has more responsibility than maybe IaaS and PaaS, the user organization is responsible for data and the users. So if there are misconfigurations or unnecessary services running in cloud infrastructure, then it's not a cloud provider's responsibility. What is needed here, is when these engagements occur, there is a need for a proper RACI matrix, where the roles and responsibilities are clearly outlined. I'll just give you an example. So take a case of PaaS. A customer might think that the cloud provider is going to patch a critical database, and that's in fact not the case. So there is significant delay. And know that today exploit kits for known vulnerabilities are available quite readily. So that unpatched database is a big cyber risk that no one really is paying attention to. So I was just gonna put that out there. And now addressing your current question, it's a great question. So in one word, how does the skills shortage in Canada look like? Well, it is quite intense, and it's getting intensified every day. And I remember a stat from IDC's 2020 Future of Work study. It's almost 2 years old, but still quite relevant. The stat that we found there was in Canada, by that year, there is a gap of close to 60,000 full-time IT professionals in Canada. And the top categories of the skills gap are security and cloud architects. So cybersecurity skills have become a rare and precious commodity today. And based on our surveys, skills gap is the biggest limiting factor for Canadian organizations when it comes to improving their security posture. It's even bigger than budgetary constraints. It's a common perception that money is, in fact, not money, but the shortage of money is the cause of all root problems. But actually, it's the skill gaps, because I know a lot of organizations that, despite having the budget, find it hard to hire and retain security staff. And it's not a static domain. Cybersecurity, it's evolving so fast that there is a need for constant training and upgrading the skill sets. So as a Canadian organization, like, I may be successful in creating a team, when I'm formulating my SOC strategy, I may be successful in creating a team, but there's still no guarantee that when an organization need them the most, they're going to be available internally. And security expertise and sort of expertise assurance is one of the biggest reasons why Canadian organizations turn to service providers for critical services like incident response, forensics, etc.
Rob, let's expand on that. What Yogesh had just said about it's everyone's responsibility to address the issues with not just ransomware when it happens, but the prevention of it. Tell me about the role that the C-suite plays. Sure, the CIO is on board, but what about the CEO, the CFO, the head of marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Yogesh did a great job earlier explaining that, the impact of a ransomware attack or the impact of paying the ransom, it's not just in direct costs, right? It's in downstream costs, it's in branding costs, it's in impact to doing business with your vendors or your partner relationships or where you have. So it's not just something that the CISO or the security suite of people need to be concerned about. It should be a question that everyone is asking, and I think drawing out and understanding where those vulnerabilities are and actually highlighting where those vulnerabilities are at a real kind of basic level is a scenario that we've seen a lot of organizations adopt now. I will admit, I've actually fallen foul for a sample phishing email that was sent to me once. It looked very convincing. It said my password had been corrupted and I needed to kind of reset my password. It was branded in a trusted source and it was a link I clicked on. And unfortunately, I fell foul on that, and it's a constant reminder that whoever you are in an organization, we can all be targeted, and the impact of that could be pretty costly, because as soon as you open that door, as soon as you give someone access to those things, you can bet your bottom dollar that the marketing person is going to worry about that. What's that doing to our brand? The CEO is worried about all of those things. The CFO is worried about what it's doing to my bottom line. What am I doing to ransom? What's the revenue impact and what are the financial impacts, all those things. What's it going to do for cyber insurance? We're seeing cyber insurance on the incline right now, but we're seeing insurance providers have to do a survey for a risk survey for those organizations. So all of a sudden now, do I rate as an F or do I rate as an A? How are you rating me? So, that's something, again, the CFO, the CISO, the CIO, they're all going to be concerned about, to make sure that, in the event that we do have a breach, we do have attack, we've got the appropriate insurance, we've got the appropriate backing. So but how do we do our level best to get to that point, to obviously keep a very low premium? So yeah, it's across every facet you can think of in an organization, down to the individual employee, all the way up to the C-suite, for sure.
Well, absolutely. And Rob, just to add to your point, at this stage, it is very important that we touch upon the critical role that business leadership plays. You see, IT security is not only an IT province, but it is everyone's responsibility. And business leaders have a role to drive a security-infused company culture within the organization that values security as a competitive advantage. And when we conducted the 2021 CEO survey in Canada, we found that Canadian CEOs expect, on an average, 48% of their revenue to come from digital products, services, or experiences by 2025. So when half of your revenue in the future is going to be driven by your digital assets, cyber risk automatically becomes the top business risk. And without involvement of business leaders, you cannot have a workforce that values cybersecurity. So there's no way CIOs and CISOs can invest in security modernization and experimentation if business leaders are not on board. Business leaders rallied behind DevOps, to achieve faster time to market, but adopting DevSecOps is going to bring a structural change to how applications are developed within organizations. And without business leadership involvement, it's just not possible for organizations to undertake such initiatives. And that is just one example. But business leaders today, traditionally they have been looking at cybersecurity as a necessary evil, or even some mature organizations look at cybersecurity as an important contributor which provides guidance and leadership when it comes to the areas of digital transformation. But only organizations who value cybersecurity as a competitive advantage are going to be the ones who are successful in the future.
Disaster recovery, that is usually the focus of any strategy. But Rob, you've been quoted as saying that there are 5 pillars to an effective security strategy, and recovery is only one of them.
Yeah, so in actual fact, when you're looking at your security footprint, you should be looking at something like the NIST framework, which is the pillars that you're referring to, Michael. And that really provides the foundation for what you're doing to detect, monitor, react, and all of the key steps that you need to go through in any strong security posture. The recovery aspect is typically the very last bastion of defense that you want to go through, because it is true to what it says. It's you're in a crypto locker situation, you're in a ransomware situation, and you need to recover those applications. So what in that situation, yes, you could spin that up into another environment that's uninhibited or unaffected, and you could get your business applications up and running very quickly. But we do take all of our customers through the NIST framework, and we explain to them the different pillars and the importance of the different pillars, because it is a defense in depth strategy. You've got to make sure that you've got monitoring at the endpoint. You've got to make sure you've got detection. You've got to make sure you've got some responsive actions that you can take all the way through the client side, server side, etc. So the NIST framework is something that we talk very heavily to our customers about.
Absolutely. And Rob, if I may just add, Michael, that's a great question, because security posture is not only a function of how well you can recover, but how well you identify cyber risks and manage them, how well your security policies are defined, and how well are they enforced, what kind of threat prevention controls you have in place, how well can you detect and respond to threats, and eventually, how quickly can you recover from them. So traditionally, organizations have been focused towards preventing threats. And one of the core principles of the zero trust model is the assumption of breach. And what it essentially does is bring a renewed focus on threat detection, response, and recovery. A Canadian CIO once quoted to me almost a year back, that for years they have been investing on technology, and now it's time for people and processes. And you know what? I couldn't agree more. CISOs today understand that no security architecture is 100% secure. There will be instances when attackers will find a way to penetrate them. And that's the time your threat detection processes, your incident response and recovery processes will kick in and come into play and limit the damage as much as possible. And I want to also add that usually organizations view backup and recovery as only the last line of defense. But the way ransomware has evolved, I would say it's also turning out to be a big contributor into your first line of defense. If you look at the modern sophisticated cyber attacks, including ransomware, they increasingly target backups to put pressure on victim organizations. So deleting or compromising backups before taking over the production environment is quite common. Hence, backups also present an excellent opportunity for organizations to detect these attacks quite early, before the damage is done.
Actually, if I can, Michael, I just want to add to what Yogesh said there, because in my previous role at AWS, I was running the global disaster recovery go-to-market business. And one of the things that we actually noticed was customers were deploying disaster recovery solutions as the first step, even though it's considered the last step in this framework, or is one of the last pillars. They were putting it in place because to go through deployment of all of the other pillars that you need to be run appropriately, it goes back to your skills gap that you were referring to. And there often isn't enough skills and there isn't enough knowledge to go around on how to deliver the first 4 pillars. So they were quite often starting with the last pillar and saying, look, at least if anything happens, we can recover from this. And recovery is not just about backup and recovery. Disaster recovery is very different depending on the recovery time objective you've got, the recovery point objective you've got, whether using third-party systems, to Yogesh's point about putting that in an encrypted or third-party kind of location. So a lot of people think, well, I'm just backing up my data and I can recover. That doesn't always cover the applications that you need, and it doesn't always recover the time that you need for those business impacting applications to be online again within minutes rather than hours or days. So yeah, just an interesting point, seeing those 2 questions come through just spawned a thought in my mind.
Right, and exactly. You might think that you've got an effective system in place because you're backing everything up, but you might be backing up that hidden ransomware that may have been an intrusion 6 months back. Restoring a 3-month-old backup is not going to help you with that. So let's talk about disaster recovery. We want to detect it, we want to react to it, and we want to mediate it. Let's talk about how those 3 elements are unique.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a first step at that. I think, the detection and understanding of a ransomware attack goes into the monitoring, right? You've got to have monitors on virtually everything that you're doing now. We touched on earlier, whether it's the endpoint of your PC or whether it's an application monitoring that you've got. The management capabilities that we have now around audit logs and the capabilities to bring all that stuff together, there are very rich solutions that we employ for our customers to make sure that we know what's going on, in a millisecond, and we're alerted to those things. If it's an intruder, if it's a bad actor that's impersonating an application or an API, we should be triggered on those things. Quite often, people don't necessarily want to fall over into a disaster recovery environment because they're worried that there's networking impacts, there's downward dependencies impacts, and can be very complicated. And what we spend a lot of time is with our customers is making sure we understand those downward dependencies, and we've implemented the runbooks so that it's seamless to the customer, it's seamless to the user. So if you get to that critical point where you need to decide to fall over to another environment, it's no longer a choice, it just happens automatically. And then you'll send a message almost that says, hey, by the way, we've just moved you from point A to point B because this is what's happening. And that's the kind of agility that services like the cloud offer that you were alluding to earlier, Michael. There's a lot of technology built into these and the cloud providers that offer agility, but when it comes to security as well, they're second to none in terms of providing that.
Yogesh, thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, great points from Rob, and I just want to add a couple of things. If you talk about how monitoring and threat detection has changed, so traditionally, threat detection has been very focused upon just looking at your logs, evaluating them, and then throwing out some alerts. But today, advanced attacks are so sophisticated that organizations have actually fallen back on intelligence-based threat detection. So we're talking about integration with threat intelligence. We're talking about analyzing the entire network flow, the entire endpoint telemetry and the telemetry from cloud. Now, these are great things. You have AI and ML models helping you, do these detections. But the problem is, the more you expand on monitoring, so is your number of alerts are going to increase. And let me just call out a data point from a survey last year. 48% Canadian organizations, they don't have the resources to even investigate all the high priority events. So that's a lot which is left uninvestigated, which is where your capabilities for automated response comes in. Organizations need to utilize security orchestration and automation. So the heterogeneous security stack that you have in your environment, it all works together. The adversaries and attackers, they don't think in silos. They look at your entire IT architecture and try to find ways to penetrate it, to exfiltrate data, to establish command and control. So when they are not looking at your IT environment in silos, why should you? It all needs to be integrated and orchestrated. So we're talking about taking telemetry from endpoint, analyzing it. And if you find something, immediately your firewall rules need to be updated. It needs to also link back to your identity access management systems. If you need to enforce a multi-factor authentication, or if you need to isolate a device, it could be anything. The point is that the response has to be coordinated and swift, because the way ransomware is evolving, we call it ransomware because it was an extension of malware which encrypts. But now there is an added angle of data exfiltration, and there are threat groups out there. I'll give you an example of SnapMC. These attackers, they have understood that organizations are willing to pay ransom not just for encryption, but even for the data that is exfiltrated. And for a lot of attackers, that takes a lot of time. A lot of detailed recon, implanting backdoors and developing persistence, and then going into that exploitation phase. But these attackers like SnapMC, they're going to get into your network, exfiltrate data in less than 30 minutes, move out, and then ask for a ransom against that exfiltrated data. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the dwell time is reducing very significantly. These organizations can cause damage in very limited number of time. So if your detection, response, and recovery processes, they don't work in a coordinated manner, there is very little chance that security teams can limit the damage that happens due to these cyber attacks.
Gentlemen, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for your time and insight today.
It's my pleasure, Michael, here. And thank you so much for all the insights, Rob.
Thank you both.
This has been fascinating. Learning that, of course, data recovery is not the beginning of the process, it's the end of the process, and it begins so much sooner. That we have this IT skills gap that many companies don't realize. They don't know what they don't know. That the corner office also has to be actively involved, the entire C-suite, from the CEO down to the marketing team, because it's not just the cost of doing business that gets affected, it's the reputational risk that comes from an ingress point as well. And of course, that all of this is something that is evolving over time as well. So thank you so much for joining us here for Ransomware Attack Vectors in 2022 and how to avoid them. A special thank you again to Carbon 60's Rob Stevens and to IDC's Yogesh Shivare. Now, if you've missed any part of this presentation, visit idc.com. And for further assistance in securing your organization, contact Rob at carbon60.com. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Michael Hainsworth, host of Where's My Jetpack? Stay healthy, stay safe.